Hello everyone, and welcome to our board game workshop. I'm Stephen, an associate at the Mountain Park branch.
And my name is Patrick, and I'm a Learning Labs specialist from the Gwinnett County Public Library Learning Labs. We'll be your instructors throughout the board game design workshop series.
Before we dive right in, let's outline the plan for these videos for everyone.
In this series of videos, we're here to talk about designing your own game from start to finish, but also to foster creativity by connecting you with others to discuss your ideas.
I'd like to stress that if you want to be a board game designer, the best way is to start simple. To that end, we've included a sequence of activities and exercises in each chapter to guide you through the design process. Additionally, we've established a Google Classroom, linked below, where you can work through the process and share your thoughts and insights with other interested community members. We hope you'll consider joining and participating.
So come along and let's get started in your board game design journey. On this slide, we see the typical game designer's process. The box to the left represents our ideation process, which we will go through in further detail in this video. The overall box of the ideation stage consists of capturing ideas and artifacts that will then be used to help you think about and design your game before you move on to actually building it. In the following videos, we will discuss the other major process steps, which are prototyping, playtesting, iteration, which happen throughout the entire process. Implementation, which is the last step, takes place once you have a successful working prototype. It will not be covered in this course. In this course, our intent is to help you get started in the process of design and creation so you can successfully create your first game. When you start in game design, you've probably already done the first part of the process, capture. This is to say, you've started considering games beyond just how they are to play and you have started looking at why they work the way they do. You've probably already started identifying themes and mechanics in games, even if you haven't heard those terms before. Capture also includes broader ideas such as potential game themes and research about those ideas. The next part is brainstorming, where you try to start building a game of your own. Now, let's talk about the first steps of your game and where it all begins, with either a theme or a mechanic.
Theme is the unifying idea of a game. You may think of it as the style of the game, the aesthetic and concept that bind a game together. In Battleship, the theme is that you're commanding a fleet of war vessels and seeking to destroy an opposing fleet. Mechanics refer to the overarching gameplay elements, the principles and structure that drive a game. Mechanically, Battleship is simply a hit or miss guessing game. There are 100 possible locations and 5 numerical sequences hidden within those 100 locations. The theme, though, takes it beyond being just a guess a number between 1 and 100. That's the value of a theme, contextualizing the game actions in an interesting and meaningful way.
Something I want to be very clear on as well is that there isn't an accepted lexicon for board game terms. So depending on where you look, you may see rules and mechanics used interchangeably. However, to try and keep things clear, we're differentiating them as such. Mechanics are the high level concept of the game. Essentially, mechanics are the goals you have for how the game will be played. Rules are specific statements that enforce the mechanics. Note that even using these definitions, the line between these areas can be pretty thin.
So a game with unified theme and mechanics will have thematic elements which provide context to players for the actions allowed by the mechanics. Essentially, the actions taken, even if abstract and representative, will make sense within the theme. For example, Risk. In Risk, your goal is world domination by military conquest. The movement and placement of the armies on the map and territories controlled shows this. If you were to replace the territories with circles and the soldiers and cannons with squares and triangles, the theme becomes abstract and the game becomes more difficult for the players to relate to. Functionally, it would be the same game, but the context would be lost.
At this point, your main focus should be trying to find the foundation to your game. This could be a theme, a mechanic, or both. This will be the seed from which you'll grow the rest of the game. Theme being the unifying idea of a game. The theme is the style of the game and the aesthetic and concept that bind a game together. You may be thinking, I want to make a game about blank, because you're passionate about a subject or find an idea very interesting. That likely means that you're working from a theme. For example, I want to make a game about power plants, or I want to make a game about ancient Mesopotamia, or I want to make a game about puns.
And mechanics referring to the overarching gameplay elements, the principles and structure that drive a game. You may be thinking, I really want a game that lets me do blank, because you've really enjoyed similar games but think you could do a better job of it. That likely means you're working from a mechanic. For example, I want to create a deck building game, solve mysteries using only images, or I want to create a game that incorporates reading skills.
No matter where you've started, your task is now to create the game as a whole. Unifying the two will lead to a stronger game, but when you're in ideation, just worry about whichever element was most important to you, whether that was a theme or a mechanic. While I'm driven by theme, Steven likes approaching mechanics first. The most important thing at this stage is to write things down. What's important to you? How do you want the game to play? As you continue to develop the game, your overall design, which includes both your theme and your mechanics, will start to come together.
Right now, you're somewhere between steps 1 and 2 on the chart. You've probably played a lot of board games, which is why you're here. That's the capture bit. The second bit is the brainstorming part, trying to come up with your own ideas for a working game. This is all part of the ideation stage of the process.
Maybe you already have an idea, or maybe not. We have a wild ideation exercise, which includes a mechanics chart that you can use to start the ideation process. It can be an effective exercise to use and let you keep your own personal idea for a game private if you wish to do so. Pro tip, the more games you try to create, the more likely you will create a wonderful one. Welcome to this exercise, the Wild Ideation Mechanics Table. This exercise will help you find mechanics to use in your games. To use this table, roll 1 dice for the column, then 1 for the row. Do the same thing a second time. If you get a duplicate, reverse the dice or roll again. Do this a third time, and then drop the mechanic you don't like or don't think fits. These won't be the only mechanics you use, they're just the foundation you'll build on.
Since we were working digitally, we wound up using a software to roll, so we modified it slightly. We used whichever dice landed higher on the page as the column, and whichever dice landed lower as the row. Remember, the point of the exercise is just to give you a random set of mechanics. First, we rolled a 6 and a 6, which meant wildcard. The wildcard mechanic is a card or tile game that gives a few cards or tiles the ability to mimic any other cards or tiles. You may recognize this mechanic from games like Uno and Rummy. Then we rolled a 5 and a 4. This gave us board space abilities. Board space abilities refer to board or tile game mechanics in which certain spaces on the playing field produce certain effects when a player lands his or her piece on one of them. You may be familiar with this mechanic from just about any racer game. Lastly, we rolled a 3 and a 4, which meant the bluffing mechanic. Bluffing is a game mechanic that occurs when players have to lie or suggest that they are under different conditions than they actually are. The bluffing mechanic often goes with the betting mechanic, but it's not required. Ultimately, we decided to stick with the 2 mechanics of wildcard and bluffing. Now that we have our mechanics that we will work from, we've started the ideation process for our game with the working title Auctioneer. Stay tuned to future videos and our Google Classroom to see more about our process.